Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. We're excited that you're here. Our topic is a really good one, Breakthrough DevOps, Successful DevOps Adoption Strategies. We're going to be sharing a lot of information with you today. Our webinar today is hosted or sponsored, by GitLab. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I'll serve both as the host and moderator, but also one of the participants and speaker. We are recording the webinar, and we will send an email to all participants that includes a link to the webinar as well as the ability to download the slides. Now, both myself and the speaker I'm going to introduce in a moment love questions, so we'd love to have you put your questions in the question tab of the GoToWebinar software. You can do that at any time, and we'll be picking up questions as we go, as well as handling some questions at the end. So let's jump to our topic today. It's my great pleasure to introduce my partner on the webinar today. Our partner is Ashishs Kuthiala, who is Director with Strategic Marketing with GitLab. Ashishs, welcome.
Thank you, Mitch. My pleasure being here.
Great, good to be here with you. And also, in just a brief introduction to myself, I'm Mitch Ashley, and I'm CEO, also managing analyst of Accelerated Strategies Group, an analyst firm. So let's kick things off. I did want to just give folks a little bit of information about your background, Ashishs, because I know you have strategic marketing in your title, but frankly, that doesn't really cover your breadth of experience. Could you tell us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mitch. Today at GitLab, I actually lead many different functions within marketing. And so, it's title is strategic marketing. But prior to this, I've had a life of being a developer. I've actually written code. I've actually managed the ops side of the house. I've actually physically racked servers and configured them and deployed code to it, managed kind of production environments. Therefore, my background on both sides of the house and my interest in DevOps began. And as I started managing teams on both sides and kind of brought them together, it gave me some early insight into what the challenges were. So I've done a lot of that. I've built products as a product manager, and then been doing marketing for last few years. I was at HP Software, Electric Cloud, amongst one of the few companies that I've been active in DevOps.
Mm-hmm. So you come by it honestly then.
I would like to think so.
I like to think so. Yeah, you do. I appreciate that. It definitely helps to know that you're coming from that voice of experience. So we're going to do our webinar a little bit differently today. I don't know about all of you, but I'm inundated with webinars to attend, and they're all kind of the same format. At least many of them are. That the first speaker goes, second speaker goes, do some questions at the end. I kind of feel like death by PowerPoint is now death by webinar PowerPoint. So we're going to have a discussion today between Ashishs, myself, and also the audience through your questions. So again, please put your questions in the questions tab, and we'll try to catch those as we go. So we're really going to have a dialogue about some of the successful adoption strategies for DevOps. And as Ashishs said, he certainly has experience of adopting DevOps. I do myself also as a former CIO, as well as a product CEO and CTO. So we have some varied experiences. I'm really interested to dig into this and learn a lot more about your experience too, Ashishs. So let's just kind of tee this up. There are so many things happening in our business world, even pre-coronavirus, COVID-19. Really, there's a very kind of disruptive change that's happening in the industry, a lot of it fueled by the software capabilities that we can now deliver and deliver more quickly with things like DevOps. But even with the COVID situation coming online and us all having to go into lockdown or whatever other kinds of social distancing and restrictions that we have, we've already seen companies react and change their business process to how they interface with customers. I know I've purchased from an electronics store who very early on had curbside delivery before anybody else did. Now they had to have their act together to be able to do that. And of course, many restaurants, if they had apps, could do ordering and really interact through, a restaurant or another service industry through a smartphone, this kind of contactless environment. Have you had some experiences where you've seen, Ashishs, companies changing their business practices already to support the environment that we're in?
I think absolutely. As a consumer, we see a lot of businesses pivoting to go either online or delivery model. what's really surprised me is the ability for the more traditional industries such as government organizations, public organizations, who would do no business without being physically present, signing on a paper, having 3 people countersign, starting to switch over to the online model using different platforms like DocuSign, et cetera, to get legal work done, right? Whether it's signing papers with law agencies, whether it's buying and selling a house now has gone virtual. So I think innovation is always what drives us forward, whether it's forced on us because we have to solve certain problems, or just in the human nature, we just want to get better. Every business is always trying to get better. So we will see a lot of innovation come out of this cycle that we're already seeing.
I totally agree. And disruption, whatever causes it, of course, is a very significant one with the COVID virus. It creates opportunity too. It creates pain in terms of economic pain and things like that. But also there's opportunity in that, and hopefully some good things like some of the innovation you're talking about come about. I know I had an experience with a car repair, auto body repair shop that was all through the app. Download, upload all the pictures, description, etc. Don't need to send someone to your house. You don't have to go into the shop. So this whole experience may push us more quickly into almost a fully digital experience, at least the capability to do that. And of course, we've seen huge, impact to both the healthcare industry as well as the financial side of things. I know in the States, in the United States, they're dealing with trying to distribute some funds to small businesses, and the systems are not able to keep up with those, some of the bank as well as government systems. So it's really putting some pressure on our environment. So why are we talking about this? There's disruption happening. There's opportunities in our markets, in our companies, and the businesses that we're in. And that's one of the real strategic values of DevOps. I know you work with a lot of companies as part of GitLab and also your prior experience. Have you seen companies start to recognize DevOps as a practice as something that's of strategic value?
I think I've been seeing this for the last almost 8 to 10 years now, but the acceleration certainly has increased, over the last 2 to 3 years. I think people were dabbling in DevOps for the first few years, trying to figure out what it was. I remember, my own experience, like going out and educating a lot of, companies and clients, and just, what is DevOps? What does it mean to DevOps? What's the changes, a calendar that they have to think about culturally, tools, all those things. Then I think in the past, like 5 or 6 years, you saw a lot of people kind of jump in, sometimes with both feet in, sometimes like kind of just dabbling in it. And now the pattern I see is like most people are doing DevOps of some sort. They've adopted DevOps, but they're struggling to kind of scale it up. They're struggling to kind of like make it work for their teams. They're struggling to kind of like innovate within the DevOps adoption that they've done, so they can start making the impact to results that were promised. They can show that back to the business so they can get more support to kind of go and do this. There's been a shift kind of on the, what phase of DevOps adoption we are now. I think a big majority of companies are adopting DevOps, have adopted DevOps, are thinking about it, and they have, some process or methodology or set of teams actually experimenting on, how do they take this to scale.
Yeah, it's interesting if you follow the Jeffrey Moore crossing the chasm, the hype cycle or the adoption cycle. The innovators, early adopters get to about that 15 to 17% of the market. Once you can cross that and get into mass adoption, and that's really kind of where we are now. Most organizations are either embarking on or already well into their journey into DevOps.
And I think it's a little bit past that because some of the companies that adopted this early on are showing massive results. We have so many conferences talking about DevOps where, people come and talk about the results they're achieving. People are getting promoted as a result of having adopted DevOps and making an impact to the business. And that's inspiring to a lot of other companies who either want to achieve or outperform their competitors, or sometimes they just don't want to get left behind. Right? It's not an option anymore sometimes.
Just to give you a feel, for our analyst firm is comprised of all experienced DevOps people, people that have implemented at a larger company. So they've gone through that cycle of being successful, and not to promote my company, but just to validate what you're saying, that they've become, independent authors and speakers and now analysts. So we are in that kind of mass adoption phase. Well, let's talk about some strategies then. I know you and I put some notes together and trying to look at this just not as the traditional, here's the best practices for DevOps, but thinking about it more holistically. And you mentioned the people and also culture and process, things like that. I think a good way that sort of encapsulates those three areas is think about it as people, process, and technology. And of course, many times I've never been guilty of this, but we jump to the technology answer, which is certainly a key part of it because that's one of the big enablers. But it really starts with people and that cultural change. What's your perspective on the kind of cultural differences that you have to start to transition to be successful at this?
Um, like I think you kind of said this or nailed this already. I mean, these three components are extremely interdependent on, you know, you have to balance the three components and have a really good relationship between them and make sure that you're addressing all three to actually make an impact in an organization. Jumping in head first with whether it's tools or just tweaking the processes or retraining people or changing the culture by itself is never going to work, right? I think often it starts with people is like what I like to say, which is very kind of at your next title that we're going to talk about our shared goals. But you need to energize the people. You need to kind of drive them to uh, the underlying goals, get them to agree to them, have a vision that they want to follow, make the change, and they will find the right processes that work for them, and they will find the right technology that enable the processes. But again, if you just go and change processes, if people are not willing, or the technology doesn't support it, it's like a balanced triangle or three legs of a stool, like I like to call it. But
Hmm.
you have to start with people because it's the people of the organization who will drive the processes or the process changes, who will pick the technology, adopt it, and kind of like drive forward the change. But you have to have the stool absolutely balanced. And you may start in one place. I often, even though I work for a company that's a technology company that provides the tool, I discourage people to start from a tool, right? Think about what do you want to drive? Who are the people involved in driving it? What processes do you want to change? And then, pick the tools that fit that and drive
It
it with
seems,
that.
I think we could probably pick some others on the list too, but it seems like this is one of the fundamental elements. You got to address all three to be able to scale DevOps. You can take a team and go create a DevOps team to do a projects with half a dozen or dozen, 20 people maybe, but to really get a whole organization to transform, and this is what it is a bit of a transformation about. I always think about DevOps as this is how we create software. It's not a methodology, but because it's
Right.
comprised of so many things, and there's a lot of flexibility in how you implement it. It's not a prescription for one answer.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about the shared goals. I know this is something that you also believe strongly in. Um, one of the things I like to say is that use DevOps as a uniter to bring people together because it is such a collaborative process. It breaks down the stone walls that tend to be well entrenched between organizations or even job functions, job titles. And to be successful, those barriers really have to kind of fall away. And this is one way to get after that.
Uh,
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to add to that. And I think one of the things that is important to also consider is why are you doing DevOps? Are you doing it as an IT project to just be better at what you do? Or thinking more strategically about it is what's the business trying to accomplish? Are you trying to be able to react more quickly in market to opportunities, disruption, competition? Is it that you're entering new markets? There's usually a bigger purpose behind why you're doing that, and that's part of that discovery around shared goals.
Okay. Absolutely. I love, when I can, telling stories that help kind of illustrate, what we're talking about. Um, I remember distinctly being in a conference room, a company I won't name for confidentiality reasons, but a large public company, and they were trying to drive faster creation and adoption of software to help the business, like general goals. And in that meeting, I happened to be, invited to. There was a VP of applications and a VP of operations, both in the same room. And we started talking about, why we were trying to drive change and what their individual goals or what the shared goals was. I think that incident left such a stark memory in my head as to, why this is so tough. Because the VP of apps literally said, look, my charter is to introduce innovation to help the business as frequently as I can, as fast as I can. Our competitors are evolving, and I really need to do this. And I need to introduce code changes almost on a daily basis, and if I can on an hourly basis. And my engineers are motivated by doing that. But I
Mm-hmm.
find that the ops team just won't let us introduce those changes. And the VP of ops who had been listening, till that point goes, well, that's the opposite goals of mine. I am paid so much to kind of keep the production environment stable. And my goals align directly to my job security and the bonus I get paid at the end of the year. The
Mm-hmm.
more stable I can keep the ops environment and the IT platform and the apps for our users, the more revenue we drive. I'm also driving revenue. It does not help if the app, the production environment goes down. And every time your team wants to introduce a change, we are scared that it's going to like break our system. And so it's our natural tendency to say, hey, the production environments are running just fine. They're bringing in revenue. Let's see whether we want to introduce this change. We got to test it. We got to make sure. We got to double make sure before we introduce this change. And so my natural inclination is to push back against, every little change you bring to me 5 times a
Mm-hmm.
day. When this aha realization sitting in that meeting that the goals are diametrically opposite, even though they're both trying to help the business. So a good part of that day was spent in a workshop, kind of identifying and nailing down, what shared goals could the two teams have that would drive them to a common vision. How could their, business objectives, or MBOs change that, or their metrics change so that they would both be working towards shared goals that enable the, IT organization, therefore the business to move forward faster.
Mm-hmm.
It's very natural to kind of stick to the goals that are defined by your organization and try to achieve them. And it doesn't matter, like, if Mitch, you and I are best friends, but if you get paid and you keep your job by going fast and I keep it by going slow, I want to try to protect my job. I want to protect my
Mm-hmm.
organization. That's what I'm paid for. That's what keeps me in the job and not get fired, or that's what gives me the bonus at the end of the year. So it's
Exactly.
really important to have shared goals, and with them shared metrics you can measure that both teams or 3 teams or 6 teams are working on them can be measured against.
Well, and it's a really good point because it isn't just about going faster. It's going faster, but still being reliable and stable. We want to be able to introduce change more quickly, but we also want to do it more confidently. So everyone is, not staying up at night. Well, you may be up every hour in some companies, never get any sleep because change is being introduced so often.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things that I always hear is that the place to start with DevOps is through the testing. Get an automated testing, build that into the process, and certainly a good place to start. It also seems like, and we'll talk about kind of the continuous deployment. It also seems to me that from a developer standpoint, first place to start is continuous integration. Get that build process, um, humming so that it isn't. It used to be at the end of the day. Okay, everybody check in your code. We're going to do one build to run overnight, right? Now it's building all the time. Every time someone's checking in the next component. What's your experience with development teams? And it seems like continuous integration now is just the standard. That's how we work.
Yeah, I think it's getting there. It's the standard, and that's the goal that everybody has. Um, Look, it goes very closely with continuous deployment. It goes very closely with the fact that um, you only gain value if the code that you're introducing or the changes that you're trying to make to fix things actually get deployed to production. And one of the key mantras of DevOps is to make the smallest change possible as soon as you can and push it out to the real world. And as you want to deploy your code automatically to production, you have to make sure that you don't break any stuff that's already working. So
Mm-hmm.
as soon as your changes are made, you have to have a process that automatically picks up that change. Test it not just locally on your machine, but test it with the main trunk or the main branch. Because it's all good if it works on your local machine, but if it breaks everything else down, you need that feedback right away. It also plays into this whole idea of the faster the feedback you can provide to anybody making a change, more in the context of the moment of time that they're doing it, the better they can deliver on the changes they're trying to make. Imagine, Mitch, that you're trying to make a change in the production code, and you made your change and you checked it in, and a couple of months later you're like, hey Mitch, you broke the trunk, and you made this change. Can you look into it and see what you did? By now you've moved on to your 31st project since in 31, in 2 months or 60 days that you're working on. You may remember, but there are good chances that you don't remember what you were working on, why you made that change, in what context, at what point. And so that feedback, if it comes right away, helps you actually understand it in the context, introduce that change. It syncs up with all the other changes everybody else is making. Make sure nothing is broken in the main trunk where all the changes are integrated. This includes, all kinds of testing, unit testing, performance testing, security testing, and make sure that you can deploy as fast as well.
That ties in really well into a question that we got from Jim. So I'm going to kind of bump us to automated testing, and we can talk some about that. But Jim asked a good question about, doing testing during development is all fine, but what about user acceptance testing? What about end-to-end testing, performance testing, load volume testing, et cetera? And thanks, Jim, for your question. Yeah, we kind of lump testing in all one big thing, and every test doesn't run every time everybody checks in code, right? There's some unit tests that can run there. Then that may kick off a pipeline of work that then's doing some more further integration testing, and different points you'll do load testing and even canary kind of deployments to help you with that. So what's your experience with strategies for kind of divvying up that testing across the development cycle?
I think test automation is one of the key principles that you need to apply to kind of really get your DevOps cycle working. We talked a little bit about continuous integration and the need to not break anything and to push out the smallest change possible. To achieve like this level of speed and agility, it's really important to automate all the testing processes that you can. Configure them to literally run automatically when the deployment happens, whether it's in your local environment or the QA environment. And sometimes you have to, this is where, when we talked about the importance of tools as well, you're changing the process, but you need the tools to support it. And test cases that need to be that are required when you change any kind of code, whether it's at the unit level or acceptance test or even performance testing, need to be identified and they need to be executed. They need to be automated the moment you check in any code. Sometimes you need to configure specialized code analysis and coverage tools to make sure that you have 100% code coverage. I think it's just built into the cycle, and you don't get there overnight. I've had a lot of experience in the testing arena, but you start one step at a time. And to the questions that development testing or code development is very second nature to developers. But the moment you check it in and you put it in user acceptance testing, you have to identify the right set of tests to run on that and run them automatically and provide the results back, and so on and so forth all the way. Because if you really think about if you're doing DevOps really well, the smallest change that you make should make it all the way to production. Whether you deploy it to the end users or not is the business's decision. but it has to be production ready. So your testing becomes more frequent and it becomes smaller in number because you're only making smaller changes one at a time. I think we have another question or two as well.
Yeah, that kind of fits into this, the whole concept of test-driven development, where you create those much smaller cycles. And you've talked about this before. I mean, that's one of the key concepts, I think, in DevOps is it's making everything smaller and making everything shorter. So in development, you're doing the test-driven development process as part of your overall testing strategy versus waiting for one big process to happen at the end of the day. It really is sort of a strategy you need to lay out for your testing, not just we're going to automate everything, because now you got to maintain all that stuff and you don't necessarily want to run all those tests all the time. Every time you find a problem, you put another test in. Well, guess what? Now you're talking hours, days, weeks to complete testing again. We defeated the whole purpose, even though we can automate it.
What about, Mitch, is there a framework that you would recommend that experience is getting concept, like you want to read that question? I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, so it's the question from, I think it's Wally.
Yeah.
Yeah, his question is one of the main issues they're facing is controls that must be in place before each gate in promotions happening. So, this what he's speaking to is the process I think we're all used to, which is there are human steps that have to happen. You have to go to approval to get this team's like a security approval or a compliance approval, auditing approval. Maybe as part of the user acceptance testing too. And I think the way I think about solving this is there's a purpose why you do that check. Security is asking a set of questions they want to make sure that you've done or some testing that you've run. And I think one of the best ways to sort of make that step automatic rather than a manual, let's stop the presses, stop all software being created until we pass go, is really involving those folks as part of the team. This goes to, at least for security, the idea of built-in security. So if the security team is part of the DevOps process, the software creation process, and they know, for example, that you're doing code scanning early on or code inspection, you're doing code reviews for security issues. They know that you're running security tests during different phases of your automated testing. That all generates data. That's all perfect information to say, yes, we know what the development teams are doing for their testing. In the case of security, for example, we know what the results are. We can go look at the data. Those reports can be produced automatically, and we have that data to validate and also for example, compliance purposes. So you can leverage the fact that you're working together, and also that you're using tools that are creating information that almost push button reporting at the end. It's not always that easy, but you don't have to stop, because every time you have to stop, you're going to slow yourself down. And there may be times when you do need to do that, but that's my perspective, is that you gain so much by people understanding what you're doing because you were part of creating it, and then you've got the data, the evidence to back it up.
Absolutely.
So to that point about built-in security, I know we're always, how do we make our software more secure? It's kind of ironic. We want more secure software, but we're creating more of it faster. So we're making the problem bigger in some ways. So and some of those capabilities, and I know in the GitLab family of products, you think about security. Tell me a little bit about what your philosophy is for built-in security.
I think like you kind of started off with the right thing, right? So balancing the business velocity that's needed with security is really tricky. Like you want to put things out there, but you want to make sure that we don't put something out there that's not tested, doesn't create security holes. The typical waterfall model has been you develop code, you test it, and before you finally put it in production, security teams kind of look at it, and often if they find any holes, it goes back to the drawing board, and start all over. First of all, you put the onus all on one team, which is the security team, to find the flaws. Secondly, creates a bottleneck in the process. If you start to go faster, you're just going to hit a wall doing this. I think of security as everybody's responsibility in the organization, and it starts with the developers. It's just hiring more security analysts won't reduce the friction between your app security and engineering teams. If we enable our developers to have the right tools, to have the right training, to build the right processes where, again, just like automated testing, every little code change that they make, you've got to incorporate security into the DevOps lifecycle. You've got to take it back to the developer's desk as they develop code. They're able to see, what security frameworks they might be violating, or they may even, with the help of the development, security and development teams working together in one process workflow, actually understand how to build the right code that doesn't introduce security holes. And this goes a little bit even beyond the developers just writing code. If you think about all the libraries and open source code incorporations, or other coding frameworks that you incorporate within your application, you have to check for security for all of that. And so you have to kind of make sure that you integrate security controls and best practices in your DevOps workflow. You need to automate the security and compliance workflows. And it goes back to being part of the automated testing, part of being the continuous integration. And then basically every piece of code that you check in, hopefully will be tested for, every commit will be tested for security threats without any incremental cost. It takes time to get there, but the developer can, immediately remediate anything what they find as they're working on their code, or, go and ask for help. You want to do it in the context of time. But that doesn't mean the security professionals are left out of this, because they still provide the overarching overview, the framework. They still look at the code when it all comes together. They're always identifying new risks. So the role of the security team doesn't go away. It just becomes everybody's responsibility to look after security instead of just one team.
It's one of the things I've heard multiple times is that developers just care about speed. They don't care about security. There's usually a security person that's saying that.
They do.
Maybe it's out of sort of the pain of receiving some code and applications that aren't secure. No developer wants to write insecure or non-secure code, not insecure, code that isn't secure.
Unless it's deliberate, right? Which no, they don't. They don't ever want to write insecure code.
Yeah, I guess there are a few, the baddies of the group. But I think to your point, if you equip people with knowledge and with tools, and of course they're going to adopt it. If you can also do it in an automated way, so that it's part of the development process, so that you're not impeding progress, you're not slowing things down because of quote unquote security, which is what we're used to, that thing at the end that you have to stop for before you can go into production. You got to prove that your app's secure. We're getting a lot of questions here about security. And of course, there's, many tools that can be used for code scanning, pen testing. One of our questions comes from Raj about, has pen testing been introduced into CI/CD pipelines to facilitate automated testing? Absolutely, that's definitely one of the approaches, is pen testing, if you will, taking known vulnerabilities, automated pen testing, and doing that as part of your development environment, part of your test environment. If there's a staging, can be done there as well as production. And if you're creating your environments with software, most of it, you're setting up Kubernetes and creating this kind of a network configuration, that can much more easily be automated and tested, as well as manual pen testing. Next question I would like to get to is from, can't see the name here. The question is, will DevOps adoption involve a DevOps engineer to write automated test case for the application, also integrate with the tool chain and run the test automatically in a pipeline? Yeah, there's you see DevOps engineer job titles all the time now. There was a debate about, at one point I know, in DevOps, is should you have a title with DevOps in your name? But there tends to be a couple of folks couple of disciplines that come together. Sometimes the people that have a strong admin background and they kind of elevate or move into that, creating this automated tool chain pipeline process. I've also seen developers who've been building applications get really interested in kind of the process and the system side of it and the infrastructure software. And they've moved into, quote unquote, being a DevOps engineer and helping create that environment. Now, sometimes it's small enough team, it's everybody does it because it's not big enough team to really separate those disciplines. And it matters the size of the organization and where you are in your adoption. Okay, let's talk about continuous deployment. This is one I think folks struggle with, of how frequently you hear about, of course, the Netflix of the world, Googles, et cetera, that are doing, multiple deploys per hour, per minute, et cetera. And that seems so far away from where folks are, where, I can remember we didn't do a release maybe but twice a year. That was a lot. Maybe a quarter was a lot. You remember those days?
All hands on deck every time you did that.
It was, yeah, don't plan any vacations. We had to do the releases around vacation plans. And now we're talking about, introducing software so much more quickly. And that is, I think, where there's a lot of, needs to be much more crawl, walk, run in the adoption of how you're going to deploy.
Right.
What kind of environments or what lessons learned have you seen working with your customers as they think about how to increase the frequency of deploying?
So it's a really good question. I think it goes also back to like one of the things that you and I have talked about throughout this discussion is smaller incremental changes also play into this. So it's always easier to kind of like make a small change that if it doesn't work out for you, you can actually back out of it really quick. So there's like another advantage of actually introducing smaller changes. They're incremental changes. It lets you actually expose the change or the innovation or the, whatever you want to fix out to a bigger set of people out there and get feedback. Feedback loops we haven't talked about much in this discussion today are really, really important. And the feedback loop can come from the tester, it can come from the security team, it can come from the developer. But the real way to get feedback on whether what you're introducing is going to work, whether it's useful, whether it broke something, is to actually expose it to your actual user base. And continuous deployment is one way of not just introducing change for the sake of change and innovation, but for me, this is the real way that you can actually expose your changes continuously to your end audience, the user audience, get feedback from them, learn what's working and not working, and be able to do that. Continuous delivery and deployment are, of course, sound the same, but they're very different. One allows you to kind of like make sure that your changes are not breaking the system. They're actually, going to work with existing code. They're production ready, but it's up to the business to kind of introduce the change when they want to introduce the change out there in the real world. So the ability to have continuous deployment is really, really key. How often do you want to do it? How much change do you want to do? It really ends up being on the business. We have to enable the business to be able to take those decisions. And then it's really important once the changes are made, you actually like watch it, take the feedback, and incorporate that back into your next set of changes. And you can do this incrementally in so many ways. You can do canary testing, you can do red, blue, green deployments, and whatever works for your business. You have to experiment and figure out the rate of change and the pace of change that you want to make out there.
You bring up a really good point of this is both a process, but also it implies some changes to software architecture over time, right? Everything's getting smaller, moving into containers, microservices, and then kind of rebuilding them into service mesh. That's part of what you have to think about. It's how much you're going to adopt DevOps in certain areas. If you have a large monolith application that's going to stay a large monolith, well, you're probably not going to be doing 10 deploys a day. It's just it's too coupled together, interrelated, and that's difficult to do. Just to share an experience, Ashish, something from my background. I took over a piece of software that was about 18 years old that was written in .NET, and we were moving it into a kind of pure SaaS kind of world. because of being as a hosted service. And one of the challenges with that is, with any monolith application, people that built all those things were long gone, and the folks supporting it knew parts of it really well and parts not well at all. And what we had to do is really think hard and fast about what parts of this application are the parts that we need to iterate quickly on. Not the whole thing. We're not going to change the whole thing every day, every hour. In this case, there was some functionality that we were using around finding addresses and providing a surface for doing that and determine what you could buy where. And that was the part that we kind of carved off and said, let's start to containerize this. Let's start to make microservices out of this. And then we can start to iterate those much more quickly. So I think that's interconnected into the DevOps process. You don't have to be doing sort of cloud native architecture, but it certainly makes it easier to iterate if you've got a technology base that's even possible.
And there's a question out there in our question panels: is it really possible to deploy legacy system changes so frequently? Very much in line with what you're saying. You're working with a legacy system, people were gone, you started to change it, you picked pieces of the puzzle that you wanted to take to the next generation, started changing that. So did you see that you applied these, kind of changes or the iterations, or what we talked about, frequently throughout the entire application, or you picked pieces that you were changing more frequently than less frequently throughout the architecture? Do you want to build on that a little bit? Like you did?
Yeah, and this really good question. In this particular case, the thing that handled the high volume transactions was this front end process of looking up an address and determining what services could be as part of the SaaS service that we offered. And that we wanted to be able to expand that and offer more kinds of services with that and do more things with address and location kind of services. So that's the part that we chose to re-architect into microservices. And that was no small undertaking, especially because the team, it was new. That kind of software architecture was not something we'd done before. And we brought in some other help, some really strong development architecture folks to help the team begin to work in that process. But I was kind of surprised at how quickly it did change. I mean, we're talking about months, not years, to begin to re-architect pieces of this. Of course, we bit off enough we could do that with. So I think, legacy systems doesn't mean they're going away just because we call them legacy systems. Many of those things are going to be here for the next 10, maybe 20 years still, because they provide key business value. So you just have to think about, again, the why. What is it we want to do with this application? And, maybe deploying 5 times an hour isn't useful, but 2 times a week or 3 times a week really is. And as you get smaller and smaller components, you can do it more frequently, if that makes sense.
One other thing that I always think about here is, I alluded to this a little bit, you have to be able to deploy or make the changes at the pace that the business wants it.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be, like you said, 2 times a year or 2 times a week. It just depends on, how fast the business wants to change. But the ability to change really quickly, the ability to deploy something really quickly should always be an IT team's prerogative, because you might have to fix things in production. And you don't want a cycle time that's maybe, 3 months to change something in production. So the ability to change something and introduce a change into production, it's always beneficial to be able to do that as fast as possible through your normal cycle, not a patch that you bypass, like the 5 processes that you need to go through. You should be able to have a pipeline and a cycle time that really enables you to do that fast. How fast does the business choose to deploy that is up to the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you don't need, if you can't introduce things that quickly, if it causes more disruption than benefit, obviously that's not a good thing. Maybe you want to focus rapid deployment in other areas. There's just kind of taking things a little different direction. One of our questions here is, what are the key differences between Agile, DevOps, and SRE, Site Reliability Engineering? Do you want to take a stab at that? I'm happy to if you want me to go.
Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll add to that as well. This topic is something we'll have a separate webinar on.
Uh, yeah, exactly. The way I think about it is agile is really a structure around how we're going to have teams figure out what pieces, what functionality, what user stories, what requirements that we're going to develop, we're going to add as enhancements or new capabilities in software. And much like we were talking about, the software is getting smaller so we can go faster. Agile does the same thing for requirements, for business requirements, user stories, scenarios, things like that. And Agile is really kind of a project methodology or a team methodology for how you drive capability through the development process so that you get this functionality in the end. Now, of course, DevOps then is how do you build the software to do all of that? You know, you heard things about daily scrums instead of large team meetings. Use tools like Kanban and other tools, which you can use for DevOps, of course, as well, to help how you organize what the work's going to be. In the case of site reliability engineering, of course, now you're talking about the capabilities of the functions of the software when it's in production as well, and what kind of things make that more stable, make that more reliable. So you're doing a lot of things, a lot of working with a lot of logs, a lot of reporting and monitoring, and alerting, and really getting much more into the depths of how do you get the noise out of the system, get to the real key indicators that are telling you when there is an issue, and then how does that integrate back into the whole process? So maybe a developer that is getting some of the alerts versus just an operations team or an operations DevOps person. How's that jive with your
The
experience?
SRE approach to go find problems so that they can solve them before they become real world problems. And that's a key distinction. They're actually looking to break things proactively so that they can kind of go fix them before it happens in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? No. So really key, role in lots of organizations to keep things up and running.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the next topic. In coming up with this one, I probably have a word, over complexified what this is. Toolchain intentionality. Really the thing here is, for your organization, are you going to have every team go out and do whatever they want, select whatever tools that they want, create their own tool chain, automate that themselves, do the DevOps engineering to, you know, make that whole process work for the development team? Are there some functions out of that that you're going to want to have common? Like we're all going to use the same code repository, for example. We're all going to use a similar continuous integration, continuous deployment platform or automation tools. So it's a matter of just thinking up front. Things tend to grow organically because people can go get whatever software, download it. They can from your site, they can from other, open source sites as well, and kind of build their environment. At some point, you end up doing this over and over again, and what things might you centralize or just make common across teams. And if you kind of choose that smartly at a different point in time, not your beginning, but a little bit later, you can really start to accelerate your development, because not every team has got that big startup cost of creating that whole tool chain process.
I think, to add to that, while different teams, if they've been working in silos, will go pick up their own tools and chain them together, it comes at the cost of this, what I call integration complexity. You not only need people specialized in each one of these tools, you need resources to literally design, build, and maintain these integrations, right, between the tools. You kind of like need to manage the upgrades every time. You need to kind of design high availability and disaster recovery policy for each one of these times. And this is very brittle, right? It can fail at any time. Some tools do provide much better functionality than others. I understand the need for that, but you want to minimize this tool chain that you're building. You want to focus more on delivering the business value and writing code that actually delivers revenue than maybe looking underneath the hood. I know it's like really cool to do that, but it takes you away from the focus of, what you can build. A line of code that you write to generate an extra, €100 or $100 is way better than, the lines of code you write to actually maintain an integration just because something else upgraded and now you need to, kind of make it work again.
Yeah, that becomes part of your software stack. How much of that are you maintaining yourself? What's the effort that goes into that? At some point, you get a diminishing returns, maybe by every team doing it themselves. To your point.
It actually even goes beyond that, right? So one of the things we see in some of the more, traditional industries, or I would say more regulated industries as well, such as the government institutions, the pharmaceutical companies, the financial companies, is you not only have to write code and make it generate revenue, but you have to take the extra steps to make sure that you are following the right compliances, you're following the right regulations, you recorded which changes were made by whom, when, what the log changes were. Think about the whole compliance, factor, the audits that happen in every industry. If you have multiple tools, they have multiple ways of storing data, they have multiple ways of kind of like recording events and logs, and bringing it all together and normalizing that is a huge effort for a lot of companies. And it takes enormous cycles. So, you have to be very careful when you think about, tool chaining, different solutions out there.
Yeah, we've had some great questions from Santosh Kumar and Walid and Satyan. Jim actually gave us another question, kind of what you were talking about. He comes from from the financial industry, where they have to establish standards and controls, procedures for auditing and things like that. And he's asking, toolchain process is causing us difficulty when trying to establish installation policy standards and procedures for the technology division. That seems like an environment where you maybe do have higher regulatory. If you think about the healthcare industry, is probably another one similar to that, where it's not just about setting up a tool chain. It's not just setting up that integration process. You have quite a bit of requirements that you have to meet, auditing that you have to meet. Okay, let's, we're almost at the top of the hour. I want to make sure we get to this topic because I know it's one that you have a lot of passion about, continuous improvement. And I do as well. And this is not an easy thing for organizations to adopt. If you've been through a quality training process, you're very familiar with this. Six Sigma, total quality management, things like that. But it is this idea of, just like we're thinking about software and what capabilities to deliver next and building those into smaller components, there's a big measurement piece to continuous improvement. I'd love to hear you talk about your experience with continuous improvement and also measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, for those of us either just stepping our toes into like a new methodology like DevOps, or we're in the midst of it actually driving the change, and like it's all around us, and we live and breathe this every day. You can share goals, you can have people working together with you, you can change processes and technologies, do continuous integration, all the things we talked about. But to what goal? And the goal always should be like you're better off every day, every moment than you were before, and you're continuously improving. And as with any other endeavor that you take, like, I think of this as being as an athlete, right? You keep training, you keep learning, and you kind of keep improving towards your goal. So as long as you have an end vision, an end goal that you're headed towards, as long as you have some metrics that you put in place that you are, measuring towards which you're getting better at, you're going to have these ups and downs. You're not going to have a straight path linearly upwards, at a 45-degree angle, like showing improvement. It's literally going to be a sinusoidal curve sometimes. You're going to make improvements and then you're going to have periods of disappointment, and then you're going to go back up. As long as like the teams are kind of like got their eyes towards the shared goals and they have some metrics that they're measuring against which they're getting better, I think the whole goal of this organization with all the teams should be continuously improving. And for that, management kind of support is really important. You have to allow teams to fail and to learn fast from that. As long as they're headed towards their goals and you see the improvement, that's key. And this could be anything. This could be, we're going to increase our frequency of deployments, over time. It could be we're going to reduce our cycle time, or it's going to be, we're going to reduce the number of defects as we go towards production. You're going to have more upside, more up time in production. You have to define those goals together as a team, and then learn to accept that you're going to fail, support each other, and you're kind of making these improvements. Really, really kind of key to kind of doing everything that we talked about it to this point.
Yeah, it is a mindset that you kind of have to adopt. And if you do some quality training, there are different tools that you can use to help you. We think about DevOps and things like the Phoenix project and those kind of stories, really about how do you get to what are the bottlenecks? What are the key things that you need to improve? Because you could spend a lot of effort improving something that's not at the end of the day going to make a huge difference. You want to be kind of smart and intelligent about how you choose those things.
Absolutely. I think you said something key that we should kind of place an emphasis on. One of the things that you can do as a team is to identify your bottlenecks and tackle your biggest bottleneck first, or your biggest problem first as a team. It sounds counterintuitive because you're doing the smallest change possible, but unless you remove the big bottlenecks in the system, any other improvements you make are not going to show through, from one end to the other. And make failure safe, learn from it, right? It's really important. Learn quickly and iterate on, how you're going to come back and fix that. But tackle the biggest bottlenecks first. It'll give you the biggest bang for the buck.
Gets those things out of the way. And it's amazing what you learn when you do that, because those bottlenecks may be there for historical purposes. It was decided to do this, 3 generations of employees ago, and now we have all forgot the institutional knowledge of why we decided to do that. And is that even still applicable in today's world?
That's so key.
I mean, jettison the whole thing instead of trying to fix it. That might be a reasonable answer to get rid of the bottleneck.
Yep.
In some cases. Well, this has been a lot of fun. We're almost at the top of our hour. Love to give you an opportunity, Ashish, any parting thoughts to share with the audience. And I just put the slide up. It's a well-used Chinese proverb. If you haven't started on these things, well, yeah, it was great. Good to do those a while ago, maybe not 20 years ago for DevOps. We didn't have DevOps as a term then, but you can always get started now. There's no reason why you're too late to the game. I don't think that's ever an issue. Any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with our webinar participants?
What you have here, and if done correctly, this is going to be uncomfortable. Embrace that. If it's too easy for you, you're probably not challenging yourself enough. And leading by example is going to be critical if you're leaders in your organization, right? Set the direction, make the ability to experiment and learn kind of very safe, as long as it's within bounds. And leadership support is really critical, supporting those who try. So I second your thought here, which is start now. It's never too late.
Just what I would add to that as well is, and you talk about this a little bit earlier, is this idea of permission to fail and fail fast. In some organizations, failure is a 3-letter word, 4-letter word, or whatever. You don't do it, it's bad. And you really have to give yourself permission to try some things and experiment, and recognize that when you're moving quickly and you're trying ideas, you don't have to go for perfect. You're not going to adopt DevOps in 6 months and it all will be happy and nirvana. It's a process to go through this, and it's a learning and growth process. It's a great opportunity for your people to continue developing their career and continuing on their journey. It's part of their development too. So while you're looking at advancing in DevOps and its adoption, think about the benefit to your people too, and give them some permission, give them some room to fail, create some environments where they can experiment. I like to use the example of the Apollo 13. Failure is not an option. Well, if you really look at what they had to do to figure out how to get those astronauts back, they failed hundreds of times coming up with different ideas and experiments of how we could create this solution to taking the carbon dioxide out of the air. So you really have to do great things. You have to try some things, maybe push the boundaries quite a bit. So don't worry about failure. Give yourself some room to do that. You know, maybe you need to manage some expectations with management to be able to do that. Hopefully they'll be with you. Well, Ashish, this has been a great pleasure. We're already at the top of the hour. I feel like we're about 15 minutes into this, and we could talk more.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Happy to kind of discuss mine and your experiences, and the questions were really great. Thank you, the audience as well.
They were fantastic questions. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining Ashish and I for today's conversation about DevOps. Hopefully we've imparted some useful information, some experiences, some knowledge about DevOps that might help you on your journey. So thank you for spending your time with us. I know it's a little bit of a different format. Give some feedback, let us know how you enjoyed it, what we can do to get better. So appreciate your time, and I hope everyone will be safe, be well, and be careful out there.
Thank you.